Progress continues on Risky Business, our Porsche 928 project. In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove, rebuild, and install the oil pump and what to look out for and what not to do. Stay tuned. Thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of Grime Time with Rudy. Early last week, when we started taking the car apart, we discovered that the oil pump was one of the culprits in many of the leaks that are plaguing this car currently. So I went ahead and ordered the O-ring and shaft seal for the oil pump. While the O-ring was a quick turnaround, we had to wait until Tuesday earlier this week to get the critical shaft seal. That part finally came in just before noon on Tuesday. So Nick and I spent Tuesday afternoon removing, rebuilding, and installing the oil pump. So let me take you through the trials and tribulations of that exercise. So here you'll see me start removing the nut and the spring washer that holds the oil pump gear in place. While we first started putting this gear puller on, with trying to put the claws behind the gear, here I am putting the nut back on so it can guide the center punch. This really wasn't the method to use. The plastic guard that's still in place just was in the way, and we just couldn't get a good bite on the gear. We tried and just couldn't get there. So finally, after a lot of thinking, we went with this route and going on the inside gears, and just slowly but surely you could see it moving, and we were able to work the gear off of the pump shaft without much fanfare once we knew where to do it. So our recommendation there is use a gear puller that can fit in those holes, and you'll be able to get that off. Here I'm trying to pry it. You can see I'm actually flexing the screwdriver, but ultimately it was just keeping the claws inside those holes of the gear and pulling from that point until it can come out, because that is a deep bore in that gear, deceivingly deep. Not a wise thing to try there, but eventually we just wiggled it far enough. You can see it's pretty far out now, and put the gear puller back on, and voila. This oil pump only fits in, it's asymmetrical, and it only fits in one way. So there's 3 bolts holding that in, 13 millimeter. The bolt that's at 1 o'clock, we painted that with a paint stick and the other bolt so that we could orient ourselves back, and we wanted to make sure we had the bolts in the correct orientation, putting them back in. All right, so here I am we're loosening the bolts, taking them out. So this actually sits in the bore of the block. There I am. I painted the hard to see with our hands in the way. But there you see the mark at the 1 o'clock position, indicating that that's how we want to orient the oil pump back in when we get it. Here what I ended up doing was we got smart, and we actually used the oil pump gear to our advantage. We just reversed it back on the shaft, and that gave us enough room on the back side to pry it out. So watch the effort here. So of course we're putting the nut back on. Just enough, hand tighten, nothing fancy. Here we go. We put a rubber block in front of it against the front of the engine block, and that gave us the leverage we needed to pull on it. And the key here is work from left to right, right to left. You have to be even in the pulling it out, because if it gets cocked, you just have to tap it back in and get it even. So that was really the lesson here. Both install and here you see me tapping it back in to even it out. So just gentle. Put the rubber block against, put a 2x4 block or a rubber block against the block to get yourself leverage with your crowbar, and then slowly pull it out. It would be an understatement to say how difficult this shaft seal was to get out after apparently 35 years. What I didn't show here is this is after the parts washer. You can see we were amazed how clean it came out, because when we pulled it out, it was quite black. All right, this pump uses a Woodruff key to hold a flat washer and the shaft into the housing of the pump. Now, what you see me first doing here, Woodruff key is basically a half circle, and there's a notch cut out in the shaft for that to fit in, and it's a press fit. So after 35 years, you can imagine it's a very difficult thing to get out. There's all kinds of videos on YouTube on welding pieces to it to do that. We didn't have to do anything elaborate here. There's just not enough meat here to get on that. So what I ended up doing was applying heat to the Woodruff key, and that actually helped start burning that the old oil seal. And here's where I just took a good old chisel, and the chisel knocked it out. Luckily, it flew, but Nick's eagle eye found it, and we didn't waste much time trying to find the key when it went flying. So the oil pump shaft seal is a rubberized contraption with a miniature spring in it to hold pressure on the shaft and keep the oil in. And to say this was a bear to get out was an understatement. So here I'm trying to use a pick, and finally just decided to burn the damn thing out.
Cool. Fire, 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 fire.
And it heated it up enough that I could just use a screwdriver to pry it out. And was glad that finally was done. So cleaned everything up. Here I'm taking the O-ring out. I have a sometimes a pick works, other times it has the sawed-off screwdriver, and this is one of those times where that sawed-off screwdriver worked very well. All right, so now here I am putting STP treatment, oil treatment, on the seal to lube that up before I put that new one in. And the idea behind that is, and here I am just using a socket, no fancy tool needed. You could buy a seal driver, but I've always relied on deep well sockets and my orange hammer, and it does the job. Again, slow and steady is the race here. And you can see that's nicely in there. All right. What you'll note, it's very hard to tell, but that gear that's in my right hand, it may look very similar on both sides, but actually the one side has the gears are radiused, and those radiuses that radius side has to fit inside against the wall. That's what forms the pumping action of the pump. And the side you're seeing now is flat with the rest of the pump housing as it's sitting against the block. Now that we have the assembly back together, you'll see the flat washer at the bottom of the picture there. I'm going to put that back on. And then we put the Woodruff key back in place to hold that in position. What you have to be very careful of is not pushing that shaft, and I'm going to show you why in a minute here. With the oil pump rebuilt, we had to steam clean the area around it because it was just filthy around that section of it from the leak. And we slowly used a tub of towels and steam to clean up the area. So here I am getting it oriented properly. Notice the length of the shaft as I'm putting this in. Again, and one thing I didn't show is I did fill this with STP oil treatment. A couple people recommended that online, as that'll keep prevent the pump from seizing as you're trying to prime the engine and get it back up and running. So very important to make sure that's in place as the oil builds pressure. One of my biggest fears here is that if God forbid, we've done something wrong, and the engine doesn't build pressure quickly, then we'll know pretty quick. You see the STP oil treatment, and Now, I'm slowing this down because I'm trying to tap this in, just like we had to remove it. Oh, and there you saw it. Let me show that in slow motion. I tapped the side of the oil pump correctly, and unfortunately, in my bonehead move, bam, there it is. Did you see that shaft move? When I hit that, you can't see in the detail, but that pushed the shaft in, and it pushed that flat washer, which is now being held by the Woodruff key, back into the seal. So we wasted close to another half an hour. Luckily, I didn't damage the seal, but that we had to remove the Woodruff key. It was much easier this time. Take that out, take the shaft out, refit the seal, and then put the washer in properly. So the lesson learned here from us is don't tap on the shaft when you're putting the oil pump back in. Tap around it, try to get it as even as possible, and it'll finally fit in. You get it in close enough that you can then put the bolts in and assemble it that way, and use the force of the bolts to pull it in evenly. So there were our trials and tribulations from this latest episode. Luckily, we got it. I think we've got it back together. It does spin freely in its position, so we feel pretty good that the oil pump's going to be fine once we start this thing back up. Hopefully you're learning a lot from our mistakes as we slowly trudge along here with the car, but that's part of the fun of it. So thank you for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.